Yale Effective Altruism student group. I'm a first-year grad student here at the Jackson Institute, where I study U.S. foreign policy and global development. This introduction starts at the very beginning, assuming you're totally new to it. If you're not new to it, or if you've thought about similar issues in a non-effective altruism lens, please don't think I'm insulting your intelligence if I go over some basic concepts kind of slowly. We want this to be a true introduction that starts from the beginning. Before I dive in, it'd be good, I think, to have our other presenters introduce themselves as well. So Jessica and Miriam, if you guys want to take it away.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a senior undergrad studying cognitive science here, and I am also on the board of Yale Effective Altruism.
And hello, I'm Miriam, she, her, also on the board of YEA. Currently, I'm a junior on a leave of absence, taking a gap, and I'm studying electrical engineering and computer science.
Great. And then before we start, a few more quick notes. First, we are recording the talk. So if you don't want to be on video for the recording, please just turn your video off. You can still ask questions in the chat at any time, and we'll make sure to get to those. If I miss a question in the chat, one of the other board members, please just interrupt me and let me know. And then finally, thanks to the EA Atchin, EA Brown, and EA Stanford student groups for helping to make parts of this presentation. Without further ado, I will dive in. Next slide, please. So if you're here today, you're probably looking for answers to at least some of these questions. First, what is effective altruism in general? What does the term mean? Is it a movement, an ideology? Is it an academic discipline? What's it all about? Second, what is Yale Effective Altruism in particular? What does the student group do on campus? And then finally, if you like the answers to those first two questions, maybe you'll also want to know how you yourself could get involved. And that's loosely the framework for what we'll cover today. I'll go over the first part, Jessica will go over the second part, and Miriam will go over the last part. Next slide. So to answer the first question, I think EA starts from the observation that there's a lot of suffering and hardship in the world that we all want to do something about. COVID-19 has obviously increased the suffering and made it more visible and tough to escape. That's why we're doing this online, for example. It's kind of a daily reminder that there's a lot of hardship that we have an obligation to try and lessen. But even in normal times, we grasp that there's poverty, intense poverty, disease, famine, there's war, there's violence, there's climate change. A lot of this stuff happens overseas, but there's certainly real problems in our own country too. There's intense inequality, there's injustice, there's disinformation that's fueling polarization and a kind of broken politics. And all of this stuff bothers us, right? When we're confronted with these problems, most people, I think, feel empathy for those who suffer. And more than that, they feel an urge to help those suffering people and improve these problems we see around us however we can. Slide. Thankfully, many people try, at least on occasion. We may donate to a charity or volunteer for our church or a soup kitchen. We might attend a political demonstration, sign a petition. My family still does an annual 5K race for the cure every year to try and raise money for research on various diseases. And these things feel good, right? It feels nice to be generous and engaged and aware of the problems. It can give us what we call the warm fuzzy feeling, like to feel that we're being kind and helpful. And that's a beautiful thing for sure. I don't want to demean or discredit that at all. It's certainly a needed first step. And I think it actually gives me hope to see so many people caring about these problems and willing to sacrifice even to address issues that might not affect them directly. But at the same time, a lot of us also grasp that not everything that gives us this warm fuzzy feeling is equally effective at actually helping. Sadly, some of them turn out to not be very effective at all, and the problems persist as a result. Next slide. And when we're faced with all of these problems at once, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? It's difficult to know even where to start. So unfortunately, even if it's understandable, a lot of people kind of just give up, or if they don't give up, they just keep the problems out of mind after they've made some initial gesture towards them to kind of appease their conscience. And I have been guilty of this myself, right? And it's sometimes people tend to give or volunteer to make themselves feel better rather than following through with that to see if it necessarily makes anyone much better off. Next slide. So effective altruism, as I see it, is essentially a response to this situation. One of its founders was an Oxford philosopher named Will MacAskill, and he defines it as follows. He says, effective altruism is the project of using reason and evidence to figure out how to benefit others as much as possible and taking action on that basis. This makes it an intellectual and practical project rather than a specific normative claim. And then finally, its aims are three things. Its aims are welfarist, impartial, and maximizing. And we can get into what those mean in a minute. First, a couple of things about this definition. Note that effective altruism is not one cohesive organization or community, so no one really gets to define it authoritatively. There's no leader or spokesman. Will's just one guy with an opinion about what it is. Secondly, EA as a social movement is incredibly young. The term was only coined in 2011, and we're very much still figuring things out. It's much more of a way of thinking or approaching problems than a set of concrete answers to those questions. Before I move on, are there any questions about this definition, especially that last bit? I know for me, the welfarist, I might not have known what that meant a few years ago. I think to me, it just means that well-being matters, right? Effective altruism is not strictly utilitarian, but it is at least partly utilitarian in that we think people's welfare or utility is important, right? At a minimum, well-being is one important factor that we need to take into consideration. So other things being equal, we should aim to increase the expected welfare of others by as much as possible to enable more lives that are happy and healthy and fulfilling and free whenever possible from avoidable suffering. Next slide, please. So just to translate that definition into simpler English, EA is really two main things. First, it's the intellectual project of studying how to do the most good and figuring out what that even means philosophically. And second, it's the practice of actually doing it, of taking action based on the principles and priorities that we identified in the intellectual project. Or in even simpler terms, sometimes I call it just combining the head and the heart to do good better. We should note that both of these things are equally important because neither of them works without the other, right? Just doing things without putting any real thought behind them might not help anybody. It might actually wind up hurting people unintentionally. And then on the other hand, just thinking about how to do good without actually doing it would be pretty useless. So we want to do both of these things together and we want to do them well. Slide, please. So as you might expect, what's the question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask actually about the impartial aspect. I've seen this definition before, but I've struggled a little bit, or I haven't given too much thought about the impartial portion of those last three descriptors. So I was wondering if it's about impartiality of the people that you are helping, or if it's just general like moral impartiality.
Good question. I think impartial is about giving equal weight to everyone's interests, regardless of race, gender, nationality, or where they live. And then it also includes an element of considering animals as well as humans. There's far from consensus among EAs or anybody else about how exactly competing interests are balanced. But I think in much conventional philanthropy or conventional aid, there's a temptation to, we care much more about, say, the homeless person we pass on the street because we see them and there's a visceral reaction there, as opposed to somebody who's equally poor, who's further away that we don't see as much. So the impartiality factor of it is just starting from the assumption that everyone's well-being matters equally, especially when we're comparing like against like. Does that answer the question? Great. So then if we can go to the The next slide, please, the 4 ideas. So as you might expect, there's a lot of debate within the EA community about how exactly to do the most good. But in a basic sense, I think all effective altruists would probably agree with these 4 points, which hopefully seem pretty intuitive to you as well. First, it's important to help others. Second, everyone we might help should be valued equally. Third, helping these people more is better than helping less. And then lastly, because our resources to help are limited, we should prioritize how we use them in a way to help more rather than less. And individually, these might seem a bit obvious or self-evident, but taken together, they have some pretty significant implications for how we think about doing good, especially that 4th point. There are so many causes, as we showed in that slide with all the horrible things happening in the world. There's so many causes in the world that you could take on, but the time and money that you have available to take them on are finite. So one of the things that EA proposes is that we should focus first on the causes where we can help the most people or get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, rather than those causes we might otherwise prefer for more personal reasons. Next slide. So how do we find out what those are? How do we choose which cause areas to prioritize and devote our limited resources towards? EA tends to ask 3 questions about each potential focus area. The first is, what is the scale or the importance of the problem in that area? If all of the problems in that area could be solved, how much better would the world be as a consequence? How many beings or people does that problem affect? Secondly, how solvable is the problem in that area, especially at the margin? One way to think of this is if we doubled all the resources that we currently devote to this area, how much of the problem would we expect to solve? Or if we gave another $10,000 or another chunk of money of a certain size, how much better would that problem get? Then finally, how neglected is the area, which is similar, but somewhat different, where are other people and resources already focusing on this problem, already trying to solve it? Or is it kind of forgotten about to where we don't give it the attention it might deserve given its importance and solvability? Accurately answering these questions is difficult since there's often uncertainty about the answers, but it's still, we think, a handy yardstick in thinking about the different problems in the world and then roughly kind of napkin mathing how much potential good we can do and identifying the areas where we might do more serious quantitative study to really figure out how much good we can do. Also, before I move on, keep in mind that the answers to these questions might be different for society at large than they are to you individually. So when you're choosing a career, you should not overlook the importance of personal fit and where your personal comparative advantage might be, right? If you don't find your work interesting or fulfilling, or there's aspects that you don't enjoy, that's probably a sign you should work on something else, regardless of how important it might be. The answer to these questions is different for every individual effective altruist. Next slide. So your next thought might be, okay, if those are the right questions to ask, what are the answers, right? Which opportunities for doing good are most promising according to that framework? And I should preface this section by saying that this is very much an open question, right? New suggestions are always welcome. EAs make these suggestions every day. But so far, the heaviest consensus in the EA community tends to congregate around 3 to 4 core areas. Next slide. The first of these is global health and development, which is probably the original and the most traditional EA cause area. And when we look at it through our 3-part framework, we see first, the scale is enormous. There's hundreds of millions of people around the world who still live below the extreme poverty line of $1.90 per day, which is itself pretty low. And this poverty has pretty terrible consequences on their well-being. Every year, millions of these people die from preventable diseases like malaria or tuberculosis or diarrhea. The good news is that we know how to prevent or cure most of those diseases, and there are even some proven ways to alleviate poverty. The evidence here is really solid. They have randomized controlled trials and other studies that are probably stronger than our evidence in just about anything else and it actually suggests that we could accomplish those things. We could greatly reduce poverty and eliminate or greatly reduce disease without even giving any more to charities focused on those issues than we already do. For example, next slide, the rates of death from measles, malaria, and diarrheal diseases are down by over 70% in the past 90 years. And in 1980, we eradicated smallpox, which was one of the most terrifying diseases on the planet. This is great news. Based on how many people used to die from these things, it's estimated that just by accomplishing this, we've saved over 60 million lives, which is more than if we had achieved world peace in the same time period, right? So that's pretty awesome. That's good progress. Unfortunately, next slide, the bad news is that we could be doing so much more, and a lot of what we are doing is very slow and inefficient. And this is just one example to illustrate that. About 700 million people currently live below the extreme poverty line, as I said, or 700 million. And then to directly supplement their incomes by enough to reach that line, which is called the poverty gap, would cost about $80 billion a year, just in direct cash transfers. Annual foreign aid from governments alone to impoverished nations is already more than twice that amount per year. And private donors give many more times than that, about $450 billion per year in charitable giving from the United States alone. So to a lot of EAs, it's pretty frustrating that so much of that aid is still lost to graft or to politicized misuse, and other parts of it are somewhat squandered on unproven or inefficient interventions, when we do have these studies showing that there are highly efficient ways to alleviate those problems. And this is just through direct cash transfers. Again, there are probably even higher impact ways to cure, say, malaria with bed nets and things that may be even more efficient than just cash transfers. So next slide, please. That's the first cause area. A second important EA cause area is animal welfare, and particularly the welfare of animals trapped on factory farms. Every year, more than 50 billion animals are raised and slaughtered in factory farms around the world. About 10 billion of these are in the United States alone. Most of these animals experience extreme levels of suffering over the course of their lives due to their poor treatment, and relatively small improvements in those conditions or their treatment could substantially improve their welfare. So the scale is pretty huge. The solvability also is encouraging. There's a number of different ways that have been shown to reduce that suffering. Online advertisements, for example, and leafleting campaigns may encourage people to take up a vegetarian or a vegan diet, and studies have shown that every $1 spent on those campaigns saves somewhere between 1 and 46 animals. Second, developing animal product alternatives can make it easier for individuals to reduce their meat consumption. Also, corporate campaigns to help lobbying to change conditions in the factory farms or taking the case straight to regulators can also have a very high impact just due to the scale of the problem. Even marginal changes to 50 billion animals is an awful lot of beings who are suffering who you can reduce. However, unfortunately, most of the advocacy that we see in animal rights issues and most of the charity focuses elsewhere. The next slide will show in the United States, can you go slide, please? In the United States, there are 3,000 times more animals in factory farms than there are in animal shelters from things like strays and pets and things. And unfortunately, next slide, only a tiny minority of the philanthropic funding goes to those factory farms. The data or advocacy on the factory farm animal issues. The data I'm showing you is actually a little outdated, in part due to the efforts of the EA movement. Last year, the farmed animal space got over $40 million. So we're making progress. It was about twice what's shown there. But nevertheless, even if we times that by 10, 400 million, it's still less than a third of what these other, what animal shelters are receiving. So in my opinion, that's pretty tragic given the size of the problem, but also a pretty clear case of people giving for the warm fuzzies and what's visible to them instead of where their money would help the most animals. Next slide. So a third, let me see, is that another question I missed? Okay, never mind. So a third important cause area is the long-term future. It's probably the fastest growing EA area and the most recent. The idea here is that if everything goes right for humanity, we could live on Earth for many thousands of years to come, maybe even millions of years. And if so, there could be hundreds of trillions of people to one day walk the Earth. Humanity could be just in its infancy with a very long and happy adulthood to come, at least civilized humanity. But that's not guaranteed. And all of those people's well-being and their existence may depend on our ability to prevent ourselves from going extinct or from to avoid so-called existential risks that could limit our potential moving forward. Therefore, efforts to reduce these risks are hugely important in terms of scale. Especially, there's a whole field of population ethics which explores just how much moral weight we might assign to potential people who don't exist yet. But if you believe that they matter even a little bit, the sheer numbers of them has a pretty heavy impact on what your calculations might be. Unfortunately, they're also pretty neglected, in part because those people don't exist yet, so they don't get a vote, right? Those who do exist, a lot of us don't spend a lot of time thinking or caring about the far future. For example, just to illustrate, the United States and Europe spend some $31 billion a year on ice cream, but far less on ensuring that our species does not go extinct, which, as much as I love ice cream, is probably not where our priorities would lie if future people got a say. Next slide. So what are these threats that could make us extinct that we might want to focus on? A partial list is here. I won't go into all of them in detail just for time reasons, but obviously COVID has illustrated the risk of pandemics. In some sense, we got lucky. We were caught underprepared, but this one wasn't as deadly or as infectious as other pandemics historically, like the bubonic plague, for example, that may have killed about a third of Europe's population. Artificial intelligence is a kind of niche area for many people in mainstream society. It's kind of been seen as like a science fiction issue, but it's made significant strides in recent years. And there's certainly great opportunity to improve people's lives with AI and things we should be excited about, but also a risk that if the technology is not developed safely, it could get much smarter than us faster than we are able to control it. And we could intentionally or accidentally unleash an AI system that we're no longer able to control to ultimately either eliminate or greatly limit humans' potential. So nuclear war and climate change are a little more mainstream concerns. I think I'll skip over those for now. You guys probably get the point. Next slide, please. So those are three of the largest focus areas for effective altruism right now, but there are many others. In fact, there's a whole focus area of its own called global priorities research, which is basically about trying to find more of them, right? We rigorously investigate what the most important global problems are, and then think through how we should compare them to one another and what kinds of interventions might be available to help us address them. So for example, how do we compare the value of more work on climate change versus global health versus preventing future pandemics? And might be there be this unknown cause X that we haven't discovered yet, but that's going to be super important down the line. Should we start working on trying to identify that now, if we can? So I should close just by again emphasizing that this is not an exhaustive list. If you are not interested in any of the cause areas that I have gone over, you should still feel free to explore whatever it is that you are interested in through an EA lens. And of course, you can have many interests and commitments that are not related to EA at all and still be part of the EA community. Every effective altruist I know certainly does. It's just a framework that we hope will help us to do good more effectively than a lot of people typically tend to do. So to recap, there are many problems in the world. Effective altruism tries to figure out what the most important ones are and then focuses on those using a 3-factor framework. Some of the most promising areas we've found so far include global health and development, animal welfare, and the long-term future. So with that, I will transfer over to Jessica to focus on the practical project of what you can do about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so as we've seen, there's just so much out there and it can be really overwhelming. But luckily, there are things that we can do to help. And that's a really awesome opportunity. I think before diving into these really quick, I just want to acknowledge that, we're really privileged to be Yale students or affiliated with Yale. And that means that we have like extra resources and opportunities that enable us to typically have a little bit of extra money to donate or to have flexibility in our career. I think it's just important to acknowledge that not everyone has these opportunities. And really what EA is about is with your resources that you have, how can you do the most good? So one simple way is just to give better. I think like everyone has at least $5 that they could donate. And basically you can donate, there's like thousands of different organizations, and it's really hard to figure out where will those $5 do the most good. Luckily, there are a lot of EA organizations that are working on this problem. So one in particular is a charity evaluator called GiveWell. GiveWell is really, really cool because unlike some other charity evaluators that focus solely on operating cost and financials, GiveWell conducts really in-depth research aiming to determine how much good a given program accomplishes per dollar. So that's like in terms of lives saved or lives improved. And then rather than trying to rate a bunch of different charities, they focus on a few that stand out the most so that they're able to really confidently recommend them as high impact. And they're super transparent about how they spend their money and do rigorous evaluations. And it makes you really confident to know that, my money is actually going and doing some things. So some charities are, medicine and nets to prevent malaria, supplements to prevent vitamin A deficiency, cash incentives for vaccines, deworming treatments, and cash transfers are some that GiveWell is particularly recommending. I definitely encourage you to check out their website. I think Miriam is going to link it. I've already linked it in the chat. Just so much research, it's super helpful. So that's mostly on global health and development. If you're interested in the animal sector, Animal Charity Evaluators is like the GiveWell for animal charities and does a similar thing where it looks at, per my dollar, how many animals can actually help, which is really useful to know when you're comparing. And then lastly, there's also this area, Open Philanthropy Project, which researches a bunch of different areas. So some of those other areas that Andrew was talking about, and then gives larger grants to those areas. But if you're interested in things like protecting the long-term future or scientific progress and innovation, you can go on their website and see who they've given grants to and how, what are some different areas that you could donate to. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. So, and one thing that we might be able to do if we have extra resources is giving more. So one thing that people in effective altruism often share is the Giving What We Can pledge. So Giving What We Can is a community of effective givers who pledge to donate 10% of their income over their life. If you're a student, that's like 1% of your spending money. Similarly, if you are unemployed, 10% of zero is zero. To whatever organization will have the most impact. This is based off a really long tradition of tithing, which is donating 10% of your income, has been around for a really long time. So I'll go to the next slide. Every semester we do a pledge drive where we show some of our students who have taken the pledge, kind of as just to show people, there's people who are doing this and it is possible, and we really encourage it, even though it's a really big decision. Given that it's such a big decision, there's something called the Try Giving Pledge, which we recommend for college students. That's where you get to pick a percentage and a length of time, try it out, see if it works, and then you can go on to make a bigger pledge. But these are just a couple of our students and alum who have taken the Giving What We Can pledge. You can go on our Facebook and see more of these quotes and pictures. A fun tidbit is that Olivia, who's here on the left, is actually now working at GiveWell. So that's really cool. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And that kind of, goes right into the idea of career considerations. There's this crazy thing that we have 80,000 hours in our career. Like that's just a lot of hours, but it's also finite. So, it's not unlimited. So it's worth a lot to figure out how you can use those hours doing the most good. Luckily, Miriam just linked in the chat, 80,000 Hours is a really awesome organization that provides research and support to help people try to find careers that are especially high impact. So they have like a job board of high impact opportunities, as well as a lot of research, a really helpful podcast, and reviews and a guide. And I definitely recommend checking it out. There's just a lot of opportunity there. I'll go to the next slide. And we always like to highlight our YEA alum. A really cool thing about Yale Effective Altruism is that there's this really awesome network of people who are working in these areas on really important things. So these are all people who have graduated in the past 4 years. So Shen on the left is now studying technical AI alignment at MIT as a PhD student. Josh in the middle is doing pandemic preparedness research with the Future for Humanity Institute. He actually had a paper on ethical vaccine distribution, which was published at a very timely moment in our lives based off of his thesis. And Frankie on the right is the executive assistant to the Will McCaskill that we had a quote from at the very beginning. So there's definitely just a lot of different YEA alums who are in these positions and trying to use their resources and opportunities to do the most good. And that's definitely something we want to advertise if you're thinking about how to do the most good in your career. Us individually aren't qualified to be giving career advice, but we can send you resources and connect you with these people who are in these positions. And that's a really big part of what we do. So I'll go to the next slide. And along the same lines, as we have all these alums, there's also just all these people in the world who are working on EA. And it's really awesome. Just from all these different countries, there's like over 200 effective altruism groups, and then far many more people who are in those groups or unaffiliated to those groups. And you can engage with them. So, you can take the pledge, as I mentioned, there's a whole community around people who have taken the pledge. You can read the career guide. There's a bunch of Facebook groups. So if you just go on Facebook and type in effective altruism, you'll find a bunch of them. And those are really good resources for finding new opportunities and things. You can subscribe to the EA newsletter, which is separate from the Yale Effective Altruism newsletter. There's like one that's more general of all effective altruism. And check out the EA forum, which is where anyone can post their ideas on these things. And there's a lot of EA progress that is made there. There's also EA Global Conferences. There's going to be a virtual one coming up this spring, so definitely check out on our newsletter because we'll be advertising that. And you can also see if there's a local chapter around you. So there is us, but even after you leave Yale, hopefully there will also be a chapter in the area that you move to. And if not, there's also EA Anywhere now, which is a virtual community that of people who don't have local groups. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Moving on to what does Yale EA do? So what do we do here? Miriam will be doing most of this, but I'm just going to talk about the fellowship because that is a big part of what we do. So really quickly, just some background on what Yale Effective Altruism is. So we're a student organization trying to figure out how to help people as much, or help others in general as much as possible. And then we support Yale students who want to learn more about effective altruism, really confront these moral questions, pursue careers that do a lot of good, and donate more and more effectively. So go to the next slide. One way that is a really great start to get into Yale Effective Altruism is our fellowship. So I'm our fellowship manager this semester. I'm very excited about it. Basically, this is a semester-long program for students to engage with these ideas. So there'll be readings each week, and then there'll be a discussion. And one really neat thing is the cohorts in these fellowships are often very diverse in what schools they come from and their different backgrounds. That's something that we try to emphasize when we're advertising and selecting for the fellowship. So you get a lot of perspectives on these ideas, as well as there's one-on-one mentoring and connecting you to those different opportunities and people, as well as a workshop and various social events. So it's a very good opportunity. The applications close this Sunday on Valentine's Day at midnight. So I think the link is being posted in the chat if it hasn't already. For the fellowship, I think it will get up there in just a minute. So if you're interested in that, also at the end, you can ask more questions about the fellowship. But I definitely recommend that you apply. It's a really good opportunity, and it's a really good way to first get involved with our group. So I'll go to the next slide. This is just some pictures of our fellowship. So this is when we were back in person, and we had nice pictures. It was very nice. Everyone gets fancy certificates at the end. And this was our fellowship last semester when we were virtual. And now I'm going to pass it off to Miriam.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jessica. Yeah, just as a quick little thing on the fellowship, just as a past fellow, I really enjoyed my time as a fellow. I kind of equate the fellowship to the ideal seminar at Yale, because you really get to meet a lot of really cool people, have like really awesome discussions, get a kind of debate and hear from different perspectives, which I think is really cool. And yeah, just get to be friends with everyone and really learn a lot. So can't recommend the fellowship enough. But in addition to the fellowship, some of the other things we do is a concepts workshop. So if you're still kind of on the fence, maybe you're not sure you want to dedicate a whole semester to the fellowship yet, definitely come to our concepts workshop, which we're running one this Saturday at at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So this workshop is really cool. It's just a 2.5 hour long crash course on some of the central ideas and topics on effective altruism. The first part, so the workshop is split up into 3 sessions. The first part focuses on some of the ideas of effective altruism and the mindset of basically just how to be effective. So some of the questions we answer in this first session is which social interventions work and why do some social interventions work better than others, as well as how all of us as people can avoid falling prey to cognitive biases. The second session then in this workshop is on cause selection. So just like Andrew was mentioning at the very beginning, just focusing on some of those primary causes, which causes are the most important that we all need to work on. So exactly, we'll be examining global health and development, factory farming, and long-term future during the concepts workshop. And the final part of the concepts workshop is just going more in depth on how to put all of these ideas of effective altruism into practice. So choosing your career, how to engage with the broader EA community, just going over that more in depth. This workshop is completely open to everyone. It is a seminar style workshop with about 4 to 10 participants. So if you're interested in this workshop, feel free to sign up. The link is in the chat. And if you really love the workshop, then also apply to our fellowship. Concepts workshop is just a great little workshop for beginners. And there is a break in between, so no worries. It used to be more fun in person. We actually got food, which is kind of nice, but unfortunately online we don't have that. But it's still awesome, don't get me wrong. Highly recommend even the virtual workshop. So in addition to this concepts workshop, we are also planning a career workshop for the beginning of this semester. The time is still up in the air. We will let you all know once you guys sign up to our newsletter. At the end of the slide deck, we'll have information on how to sign up to the newsletter. But so this career workshop is just basically reviewing those resources that 80,000 Hours provides. They have a lot of amazing resources for how people can choose a career path that is right for them, is right for their personal fit, as well as just discussing how to use your career to do the most good. So this workshop is going to be in partnership with the Office of Career Strategies. Should be really cool, and we're looking forward to it. So in addition to that, just some other ideas of like events we've done in the past. I think this is an event that we did with Laurie Santos, the professor at Yale, who taught The Good Life. So this is a fun little workshop. So yeah, similar to the upcoming career workshop we have next weekend. This workshop was just figuring out how and having discussions about how to have a good life, how to have an impactful life after graduating from Yale. It's also we also have a lot of alumni, as I believe Jessica was mentioning earlier. So we do have a lot of times that we just speak with alumni, get to hear with them. A lot of networking happens in effective altruism, and YEA is very connected with some very prominent people in the effective altruism movement. So we are here to support you in your professional development goals as well. Just so everyone knows, and yeah. So some other events that we are planning for this semester is weekly discussion groups. So this semester we have 2 different discussion groups in addition to the fellowship, which is really exciting. The first discussion group is just a general discussion group that takes place each Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's really cool place for everyone who has a decent understanding of EA to discuss relevant topics within the movement. So some of our past discussion groups have been on criminal justice reform, on voting, money and lifestyle, population ethics, religion. Even if you guys have an idea for a discussion group, you guys can be facilitators. We do have a lot of members of our community who just are really passionate about a certain cause area or about a certain topic, and they just decide to lead a discussion. So definitely come to those. Highly recommend them. They're super exciting. Get to talk about a lot of relevant issues. And besides that, we also have a discussion group specifically focused on artificial intelligence. So this AI discussion group is going to go over AI safety, discussing relevant papers and ideas in the field. And this is happening every Monday also at 8 p.m. Eastern time. This should be really exciting. Everyone's just going to contribute to discussing a paper they read to the entire group. Everyone's just going to talk about AI, how AI research can develop into more safer practices for, once again, the cause area of long-term future. So yeah, these are the 2 weekly discussion groups, and a lot planned for the semester. Another thing we do is discussions with professors. So these are more one-off events versus weekly or recurring events. But we've had some really cool discussions with professors who are, of course, experts in their field. One of them, who's always a really popular talk, is Shelley Kagan. He actually is teaching an EA seminar this semester on ethics and the future. And last year he published a book on how to count animals, so basically animal welfare. So those discussions are always really cool because you get to talk and hear from actual research from these professors. In addition to that, there's also global conferences. So I saw a picture earlier on the presentation that everyone actually got to go to the global conference in Boston in person. We will see if in person happens by like fall, but like for this semester, there will be virtual conferences at least. There was a virtual conference last semester too, and it was super fun. So these are the dates for the upcoming global conferences for this semester, virtually, of course. And these conferences are really cool because you get a network with EAs from all around the world. And it's super exciting because you just get to meet with them. You can get mentors, or you can mentor someone else. You get to meet students, professionals, people at all stages of their professional careers. It's really cool. And there's just a lot of like interesting talks done by experts in the field. So you get to connect with them, meet with them after their talk, learn a lot. And it should be really exciting. So yeah, there's a picture. Super cool, really fun. It's all that much fun, but virtual. And hopefully one day it can be in person again. So highly recommend the global conferences. And of course, socials. We are a social group. A lot of us are very good friends with each other. We have virtual socials. We have virtual mixers with other schools, which is really exciting. We, of course, pre-COVID, we had in-person socials, but for now we do have virtual socials. Those are some fun board game nights, fun times. We have a retreat normally in person, but this year's all virtual. But definitely come to our virtual socials and have as much fun as we would have in person, but just over Zoom. Which is really pretty cool though. So on that, our upcoming social is on playing Kahoot. So we came up with this really cool Kahoot on EA trivia, and the winner will get a prize. Yes. If once like the restrictions on Yale's campus like calm down a little bit. There may be socially distant walks in New Haven for those of you in New Haven. So that'll be exciting. So yeah, lots of cool social events planned. Next thing that's super exciting is brand new this year, or this semester actually, which is SHIPS, student-led high-impact projects. So these projects take place over the whole semester, and basically they're just projects that are self-directed by students or group of students to work on areas to improve effective altruism as a whole. In addition to you choosing a project to run, it's super flexible. You get to choose whatever you want to run. There's different topics on or different projects you can choose. So for instance, you can do a literature review, you can do research on certain EA topics, you can coordinate a reading group, you can do some advocacy or spreading EA ideas to the broader population. It is really anything you want to do. And in addition to just working on a project to improve EA, you get to continue participating in some career workshopping events as well as mentorship. We are getting some influential EAs to hopefully be our mentors for these projects. So that should be really exciting for the semester. And yeah, email me if you have any questions or interested in participating in this. And of course, speaker events. These are also one-off events every so often that we have. And in the past, we've had some really cool talks done by law students, alumni. A lot of alumni give talks. Some influential people in effective altruism. This is of Julia Wise, who's a community liaison at the Center for Effective Altruism. And yeah, just a lot of people who come. Oh yeah, wait. Actually, Will McCaskill, the guy who gave a quote from at the beginning, also at Yale. Yeah, normally, of course, these also were in person, but they're very highly attended, of course. But yeah, this year is just virtual, but still have some really cool speakers. And if you guys maybe know someone who you think would be a good speaker, we could probably reach out to them, and they would love to come. So yeah, speaker events are always really fun, really cool to hear from professionals. And this isn't part of the presentation, but this upcoming weekend is the Yale Philanthropy Conference, and there's going to be some EA speaking at that. At the end, maybe Andrew can tell us a little bit more about that, because he planned this talk on effective altruism. It was really exciting. Yeah. And of course, just as Jessica mentioned earlier, every year we do a Giving What We Can pledge drive, where we just talk with Yale students about giving what we can and how to donate to effective causes. We also do a lot of other events too. We've run workshops, other kinds of workshops. We've also had film screenings, which is really fun. Pre-COVID, we haven't had one since COVID, but we could have a film screening on a relevant topic. And we also have one, we also teach classes for high schoolers in the New Haven area about effective altruism. And we also have a lot of resources for you. So one of those resources is Effective Thesis, which basically just helps students make a meaningful thesis and have work on a thesis that has a big impact. So yeah, we have a lot of resources for everyone. Cool. And yeah, just so brief overview, taking a step back on our weekly schedule for the semester. Mondays is going to be our AI discussion group. Tuesdays is when the fellowship discussion is for those participating in the fellowship. Wednesdays are our general discussion group on rotating topics. Thursdays are board meetings. Anyone is welcome to attend those. And weekends are social events generally, or any other workshops happen over the weekends. So then our upcoming events, already mentioned those in the presentation. Feel free to take a screenshot of that, put those in your calendar. We also have Facebook events made from those. So if you'll want to just go back to our Facebook account, our Facebook page, you can just mark going and mark interested and add those to your Google Calendar. At the end, we also have a, what's it called? Our calendar too, we can share with you. Cool. And yeah, we would love to have you be a part of our community. It's really great. We all get to meet each other, both grad students and undergrads within Yale and at other universities. So there's a lot of networking. It's really cool to meet some really cool people who do really cool things. Yeah, you get to be a better thinker and learner. You really can't emphasize the fact that you're really learning from everyone and hearing about all the awesome things you do. Once again, networking, mentorship, internships, jobs, how to make your career count and do as much and have as much impact in your career as possible. You also will get a lot of access to high quality programming, high quality speakers, high quality individuals who come to Yale and want to, all our alumni who will gladly give advice to all of us. And yeah, just a really great space to think about your career, think about your direction in life, think about donations, how all of us can do our part to make the world a better place. And it's just fun. We love each other. We're a great community. We're friends with each other. So it's a really great place to be. Really enjoyed my time in YEA. And yeah, and the last thing, if you are interested in organizing events, organizing events, organizing the community, feel free to join the board. There is a link to the board, which someone will put in the chat. And board applications are also due the same day as the fellowship applications. So next Sunday at midnight. The board is super fun. I really enjoyed my time on the board. Yeah, we get to organize cool events like these. Yeah, it's great. So if you're interested in organizing, feel free to fill that form out. And just finishing it all off, doing good is really key to live a satisfying life. It's great to make other people, make the world a better place, to help other people effectively. You can do a lot more good than you think generally, and that's something I've really learned at EA. I'm sure all of us in this community have learned how we can best support each other to do the most good as possible. We have a huge opportunity to make the world a better place for lots of future generations, for lots of really improve on lots of neglected causes. And yeah, you get to, as part of this community, well, we all get to be a part of this community of like-minded people who care about improving the world and making making the world a better place. Yeah, so these are some important links. Feel free to jot them down, subscribe to our newsletter, like us on Facebook, talk with one of us one-on-one, reach out to our email for any questions, apply to the fellowship, apply to the board, and we are all here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you all so much for coming. Hope you learned something today.
I definitely want to encourage people. There's a lot of things that we do. So if you're still kind of confused about how you should get involved, I definitely encourage you to sign up for a one-on-one, and then we can figure out, like, personally, given your level of knowledge with EA and interest and time, what would be the best way for you to get involved. And we can also answer any questions right now too.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the weekly discussions, both the AI discussion and the general discussion, how long do they usually go for?
They run from 8 to 9 on Wednesdays on the general discussion. The AI, I am not certain. Notes
it is also 1 hour, 8 to 9.
Also 1 hour, 8 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, it is common. Sometimes people show up for the first half hour and have to duck if they have some other commitment. Or if you can't go to every discussion, that's also very common. Attendance fluctuates. It's not an obligation to sign up to all of them. If you sign up for our newsletter, we advertise the topic for that week's discussion each week. So you will be able to see if that particular topic interests you. You can show up to that one, but not to another one. And we'd still love to see you there.
Got it. Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Could you explain how the EA group at Georgetown would be working with the Yale Effective Altruism Fellowship program? Like, how, I didn't quite understand that partnership.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. This is our first semester where we are, in the past, we've helped different groups at other colleges who are trying to start an EA group by co-running a fellowship with them. So that's what we're doing at Georgetown, is we're basically, we're either going to have a Georgetown cohort and a Yale cohort of the fellowship, or if we have enough people, we'll combine the two cohorts, if that makes sense. But yeah, basically we do a lot with other schools that also have EA programs to just help out and share our resources.
Thank you.
All right. Then if there are no other questions, thank you all for coming. You have our links in the chat there. If you think of something afterwards, you'd like to reach out to us, you'll know how to do it. It's been a pleasure, and we'll hope to see you around.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.